Hi guys. So yeah, as they just introduced, my name is Nelson. I was at a little school on the other end of the town for high school. You might have heard of it, called Shanghai American School. So you know, kind of part of the same community. It's been, I don't know, 7 years now since I was in high school. It's nice to be back in this sort of environment. A little bit more about myself. As mentioned, I was at Berkely for a couple of years after high school. Before I dropped out in 2013, I took the Thiel Fellowship, which is, if you don't know, Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, every year gives $100,000 to 20 kids under 20 who want to start their own company, nonprofit, whatever. I was one of the recipients in 2013, so I went and started a company, a hardware company. We made audio products. Raised a few $100,000 in sales on Kickstarter, and then since then I've raised a few million in funding. So it's gone fairly well so far. But today what I want to talk to you about is more about actually what has motivated me since I was a kid, since I would say in like middle school or elementary school even, to pursue this path. Why I've always been so interested in hardware and electronics, in taking things apart and building new things, and sharing that with the world at large. So, do I have a clicker for my slides? There you go. Just wave my hand when I want to go to the next slide. So yeah, today I want to talk to you about hacker culture. Next slide, please. Yeah, so usually when you hear the word hacker, I would guess you're thinking of some guy like this with an anonymous, V for Vendetta mask, trying to break into all sorts of systems, doing all sorts of nefarious deeds. But that's just one type of hacker. The term in general is broader, and today I want to talk to you a little bit more about this entire culture, the history, and for me, how it all propelled me to take the path that I've taken in my life. Next slide. So it actually starts with model trains, which is a little bit strange. The word hacker, as a term to refer to people like myself, like the people I work with, who like to, work on computer systems, electronics, whatever, and basically it actually defines more of a playful kind of mindset, where whether it's computers, whether it's, networks, it's more about just trying to take things to their limit, to mess around with them, to take them apart, to see what they can do beyond what you're told, should be possible. Next slide, please. And this originated in the 1940s at MIT in a ramshackle little plywood palace called Building 20, where the radiation lab was. A bunch of college kids back then, they loved model trains, as many of us might, and they built massive layouts of model trains in this building. But gradually, as they had to work on the control systems and timing, et cetera, for these trains, they got deeper and deeper into more technical problems. And at the time, what was becoming available were these microcomputers, as opposed to the original computers like ENIAC, vacuum tube-based computers, which are huge, took up whole rooms. These were smaller. They still didn't look anything like the computers we had today. They were things like the PDP from DEC Corporation, or Altair, or IBM, the original computers. No screens, no user interfaces, just a bunch of blinking lights. But they were using these to control their trains. And this sort of playful attitude developed, where they liked to mess around with these systems and see what they could do and take them beyond their limits. And this is where the term hacker originated. Next slide. So yeah, the whole culture, I would guess, started with the Tech Model Railroad Club at MIT, messing around with these original computers that looked kind of like this. And the kind of ethos of that whole subculture could be summarized in a quote from that time, that information wants to be free. And this sort of attitude has pervaded the whole culture since then. This idea of sharing everything, of being transparent, of being open with all the things that you learn, and sharing this knowledge with other people so they can create more and explore even further, as a whole community of people, not just people working by themselves, siloed from each other. So this, continued to develop over the decades, and it extended to people like the guys in Berkely. If you've ever heard about the original story of Apple Computer, they started out building these little boxes that played the exact frequency of telephone tones, over payphones that would give them free calls, for example, to the Pope at the Vatican. Really, ridiculous stuff. But they were just able to exploit all these little technical details and loopholes to just do fun stuff and play pranks. And actually, the word hack originally used to refer to just a prank he would play on other people. Next slide, please. And so, yes, for example, the Homebrew Computer Club was another sort of hotbed in Berkeley in the 1970s for people who, inspired by these microcomputers that I just talked about, wanted to build their own, because it's not just enough to use something that someone else has built. At some point, you feel like you have to improve upon it, to build something new, to create something that hasn't been seen before. This is what Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, this is what they felt. So at the time, they were just messing around in their garages and created the Apple computer, the original PC, the original personal computer. And that, you all know how much that's revolutionized the entire, not just industry, but the entire, I would say, path of humanity since then, right? The way it's democratized and spread all these possibilities and all these abilities and tools for people to use for any sort of creative endeavor. Next slide, please. And at the same time in Berkeley that the Homebrew Computer Club was around, in terms of software, a lot of the really, really important foundations for all of the software that we use today, including in your own MacBooks and iPhones, these operating systems, they were being developed by guys like Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie at Berkeley as graduate students. They just took the software that they had developed at Bell Labs and started messing with it and tweaking it even more and more. They built the Berkeley software distribution, a version of Unix that's a competing branch with Linux, which some of you might have heard of, and that's become the basis for Mac OS, iOS, for example. And these are all open source. So this idea of open source being that when you develop software or even hardware, you don't just keep it to yourself and patent it and keep it secret for fear of somebody else benefiting from it. The exact opposite. You want to keep it open. You want everybody to see how things are built. They can improve upon it. They can fork it. They can make their own changes. They can make something new. All in the interest of transparency, of information being free. Because in this way, everybody benefits even more from the sharing information. And it's not like if somebody else gets to see how I've built something and built something even better, it's not like it's not a zero-sum game. I'm not just at a loss because of that, right? And this sort of thinking, in its own way has permeated even to China these days. I don't know if any of you have heard the term Sanzai, but in Shenzhen, all these companies that build ICs, build chips, they just open source basically all of their designs for phones, for all sorts of different devices, consumer devices. The point is that the entire ecosystem, the entire industry gets to benefit from this, build even more, and like a rising tide, brings everybody up, right? So in this business model, as opposed to, I guess, the more traditional American or Western business model of every company being siloed in their proprietary, ecosystems, and I don't know how many hundred different competing standards. This has turned out to be very, very beneficial for the Chinese economy, for example, and also for consumers. Next slide, please. So after the 1970s, when all of this sort of hacking and tweaking of software and hardware was becoming more and more popular around the world, the Chaos Computer Club was started in Germany, in Hamburg, in 1984, which is, I guess, I don't know if it's ironic or appropriate as a starting year, right? And they were also not just focused on the act of hacking, on the act of playing with these systems, but also on the societal implications and the political and philosophical implications of hacking as sort of a philosophy, right? Of this idea of transparency, of freedom of information, freedom of speech. And since then, the Chaos Computer Club, since their first Chaos Communications Congress in 1984, they've held events like this every single year for the past, over 3 decades. And a lot of groundbreaking, not just technical, but also political, events have happened at these. For example, Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who broke the Snowden story about PRISM, was a very often spoke at CCC and broke a lot of news at CCC. They've demonstrated the danger of biometrics, like the fingerprint sensor on iPhones, how these are so easily exploitable. They've hacked into the Pentagon, as you might see in movies. This actually happened back then, just simply to demonstrate and reveal the different ways, not just that technology is useful for us as individuals, as common people, but the ways that also it might be being used against us by governments, by corporations, by bad actors, right? And in general, just instilling a sense of responsibility in how we use technology and how we develop it and how we spread it, right? It requires a lot more thought along these axes than we might think, along daily life when you're using your phones and basically sharing your data with these corporations, with these governments, sharing not just your data, but other people's data as well. What does that mean? What does that imply? What could that lead to, right? So, communities like this, organizations like this, they all revolve around this same, ethos that I mentioned in the beginning, that information wants to be free. And it's not just about hunching over, a computer or a workbench and building something. It's also thinking about, what does it mean that I'm making this? What does it mean that I'm messing with this, right? And how could I impact things on a much deeper level? Next slide, please. So I had the pleasure of attending CCC a couple of years ago in Hamburg in 33C3 and saw a lot of really interesting software, hardware, and these days it's spread to even more, hacking as a term has spread to much more than just technology or, geeky stuff, right? It can apply to anything in your life. Just the idea that don't just use things the way that you're told you're supposed to use them. Don't just go through school, university, get a job, and view your life the way that kind of it's been scripted for you, right? Break out of the system, mess with it, change it, do it in a way that you think is the most interesting, the most useful to you, to other people. Next slide, please. So at one of these CCC events in 2007, Jens Oleg and Lars Weiler, two members of CCC, introduced a concept which had already been around for a long time, but they really solidified the idea of a hackerspace. So some of you might have heard about hackerspaces before or even been to them. I know that our hackerspaces in Shanghai actually have employed a few SMIC students in the past as interns. So the idea of hackerspaces and the design patterns involved, and what does it mean to have this kind of space for hackers to mess around in, to build stuff, to share knowledge and information with each other, and what should it be used for? What kind of good can it do, right? Next slide, please. So since then, there's been an explosion in the number of hackerspaces around the world. So a hackerspace is like I've just mentioned, any kind of space. It can be in a school, it can be in a company, it can be anywhere where people can get together, share their tools, share their knowledge, build projects together, not necessarily for monetary gain. Sometimes it's entirely possible as well, but simply as a way of exploring and spending their time and sharing knowledge with each other to learn new things, to build new things. So here's my friend Severin and the hackerspace that he started in Munich Maker Lab. And plenty of these started popping up all over Europe, all over Germany, and eventually in the United States and also China as a natural next step in this entire culture of hacking. Next slide, please. So one example of this is C-Base in Berlin, which was started in 1995. It's this amazing sort of huge underground complex. They call it like a buried space station. It's very psychedelic, very, like vaporwave before they even existed. And they give many different events, many different workshops and talks about free information, free internet, as well as surveillance and all these different topics, as well as just building cool stuff 24/7. Next slide. And you can see here, just based on the CRT monitors in the back, this is probably sometime, I don't know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, people are already playing with VR headsets. I don't know how many years, at least a decade before Oculus even became a thing, right? And the point is that all these hackerspaces are hotbeds for this development of new technology, whether it's stuff like VR or 3D printers, which is old news now, but back then all that development was happening in hackerspaces, or drones, aeronautical, like cheap aeronautical technology, space programs, AR, all this sort of stuff. A lot of it is developed in the beginning in hackerspaces, not by people with a lot of money in companies, but just people messing around the same way that Steve Wozniak and Jobs were messing around in their garage. It's still the same lineage, it's still the same tradition, and it's in my view, it's very wonderful. Next slide, please. So in the US, a group of people, they went to Germany, they went to Europe, and saw all these hackerspaces spreading everywhere, and decided this is something that the US also needs. They went back to San Francisco. They started a hackerspace called Noisebridge, which is one of the most famous hackerspaces these days. It, again, has also been embroiled in a lot of not just technical, but political and societal change, as you might have heard about in San Francisco with Occupy, and as well as the events happening now in the US. Next slide. And for myself, this starts to get closer to my personal journey as someone, as a kid in 2010, 2011, who was a senior in high school at SAS. I had always been a kid who loved taking things apart and just putting them back together in all manner of ways and seeing how things work. I didn't really know much about this whole culture that existed, except maybe from a few movies, for example, like Pirates of Silicon Valley. It's a great movie you should watch. I discovered Shinsejian, which is the first hackerspace in Shanghai, and still probably the most important hackerspace, I would say, in Asia. I'll talk more about it later, but after spending a year there and a summer there working for Shinsejian and really learning so many skills, I felt like I learned more in 1 year than I had my entire educational life, K to 12. I went to Berkely and started a hacker group with 15 other friends, hackers at Berkely. We ran hackathons, we ran workshops, teaching people all manner of different skills, and seeing what people could build, and continuing, we hoped, this tradition at Berkely of the hacker culture that had started decades before, that had gone through many different iterations with the Homebrew Computer Club, with BSD, with the open source community, and we hope to bring that even further. Next slide, please. And around the time that I dropped out, we had also managed to build our own hackerspace sponsored by Texas Instruments called Supernode, with all sorts of equipment, 3D printers, I think eventually CNC, oscilloscopes, signal generators, the usual, for kids to build their projects in, students to build their projects in, not just for class, not just assignments we were given, but anything we could dream of that we wanted to build. And I'd built many things in this hackerspace as well as in Shinsejian, including the prototypes that eventually went on to become the products that I started a company around and sold. Next slide. So there's my friend Vikram, and here's an idea of some of the equipment that you would find in hackerspaces, like a Delta 3D printer. I don't know what brand this is. Computers, obviously, vinyl cutter. So this whole idea around rapid manufacturing and prototyping, and these sorts of tools that are becoming more and more widespread around the world, available to people of all ages and nationalities to develop their ideas, to test them out on people, and eventually to share them with the rest of the world. These are very important technologies, and they all sprung out of this same culture, the same set of ideas. Next slide. And so I come back again to Shinsejian, which I want to talk about now, which was started in 2010, and I joined end of 2010, early 2011. So I've been a member for 7 years now, and it's been a very important part of my life as a space where I feel like I actually got to grow up and grow into who I am now. And when I joined, it was maybe 6 guys, all working there, sort of off hours from their jobs, in a tiny space. I think I would say maybe half the size of this stage. No internet, no air conditioning. We got internet by breaking into the ceiling, snaking Cat5 cable into the dance studio next door, and hooking up to their router without their knowledge. We got air conditioning by picking up some AC unit that someone had tossed out on the street, bringing it back, taking it apart, fixing it, made a beer cooler out of it as well, and made our own sofa out of like stray bamboo picked up out the street. So real sketchy, real scrappy sort of stuff. But it was very inspiring to me as a kid to know that I didn't know jack about anything. For example, my soldering skills were atrocious. I only knew what I had read on the internet. I didn't have any money to mess with this stuff, but there was still so much I could build with my own bare hands. And this was so empowering for me. So I went to the hackerspace. I hung around with the guys, 2 decades older than me, and said, I don't have any money for membership fees. I'll sweep the floor if I have to, right? I'll just do something to be around here and just absorb through osmosis all this knowledge. And they're like, fine, okay, just be a staff member, clean up around here, maintain the tools, and learn, and then that's it. And I did, and I started, helping organize a space, running workshops, building my own projects. I went on to Berkely, like I mentioned earlier, and continued that there, and tried to continue it with my startup, has continued it since then in all manner of ways, different things that I do. Next slide. So, for example, here's a tooling room in Shinsejian, an idea of all these tools are donated by members or friends, in our community. Drill press, bandsaw, right, circular saw, there's welding earlier as well. All these are donated. We don't have any money, but that's not the point, really. There have been successful commercial projects out of this space. For example, the headphones that I had built, as well as electric skateboards, helicopter, VR simulators, as well as a company building avionics for helicopters out of Shinsejian. And plastic recycling, kits for students in the vein of Arduino, if any of you have heard of that. So plenty of projects going on all the time. People move in and out of this space. We have people coming from all over. And the beautiful thing about hackerspaces, about this entire culture, is that you can go to any city in the world that has a hackerspace, show up and say, I'm from Shanghai, I've hung out at Shinsejian before, and people will welcome you with open arms. They'll just take you in, they'll show you everything that they have, that they're building, and it's this worldwide community. People don't have to know each other. It doesn't matter what your politics are, what your nationality, what your language is. All that matters is that you care about this, basically, hobby. But it's an important hobby. It's a very, very powerful and very, very impactful hobby that, taken really far, can make great change in the world, as we've seen throughout the entire history of the hacker culture that I'm talking about. Next slide, please. And here's another space in Shanghai called Coder Bunker. It's started by the same guy who started Shinsejian, Ricky. This is a little bit more professional focused. So as an example of how different, different kinds of hackerspaces, different communities, different ways of organizing this come together. This is a bit more focused on software, and they run co-learning. So anybody, it can be a student like you guys, like high school students, or older people who just want to learn something new. They just come together on weekends or after hours in this space. They throw up some online learning platforms like Free Code Camp, learn how to program, learn how to mess with Raspberry Pis, and as they develop their skills, also be able to pick up contracting projects, consulting projects, and build stuff for clients and make money that way. So that is the end of my talk when it comes to the entire hacker culture, but I'd like to invite you guys, anyone who's interested, to check out in Shanghai, Coder Bunker or Shinsejian, to come over sometime for some workshops, think about being members, or think about becoming an intern like we've had in the past from SMIC. And if you're visiting anywhere new, on holiday, whatever, check out if there's a hackerspace in the area. Stop by, just say, I'm from Shanghai. I'm interested just in learning something. And I think you'll be surprised in that rabbit hole that you'll be taken into. Just beware. I mean, you might end up like me, doing this for the rest of your life. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.